Okay, so hello and welcome on my quickie called How Listening to Test Smells Solved My Problem. My name is Grzegorz Galezowski and I work for Motorola Solutions in Poland. And in my free time, I write a book on test-driven development that you can find on GitHub. And in this presentation, I'm going to show you an extremely simplified version of what we encountered with my team, a simple case study, and what was the first solution we developed, and how we solved the initial problems that occurred. So basically, we were creating a location system. So this was our system, and the APC user could just subscribe for any kind of GPS notifications for particular devices in a public safety environment, so like firefighters or policemen or anything like that. And each time the location would be reported, then the subscribers would just get the information. And of course, if somebody subscribed the wrong way, they would get an error saying that the subscription is wrong. So this is the whole domain knowledge for this presentation. And we tried to do this validation test-driven. So our first test was a happy path. So we said, well, we have a validation and a request that has an owner, a target of the subscription, and a duration. And we expect that if all of these values are valid, then the validation of the request does not throw any kind of exception. And of course, this is not enough, because the reason we make validations is for them to fail sometimes, right? So another test would say what should happen in a situation where the owner was wrong. For example, it was set with wrong format, and if it contained characters that were not allowed. And the same thing for the target. So again, this had some format constraints. So when we would supply the wrong value, it would throw an exception as well. So this is what we expect. And the duration has a minimum constraint, so anything below the minimum leads to the same exception. And so far, we had the following test cases. The happy path test case, the test case describing the failing validation of an owner, a test case describing a failed validation of target, and the same for duration. And all was well until another requirement came, and the target of the subscription could now be in a domain. So there could be 2 or 3 radios with the same names, but in different domains. And of course, we had to maintain the happy path test and set the valid value here, right? Because we still wanted this test to pass. And also we needed to add another test that would say what should happen when the validation of this field, this property, failed. But as a side effect, we had to go back to all the other existing test cases and include the valid value there as well. This is because, for example, if this was not set to the valid value here, then we would not know whether the exception was caused by this one failing or this one failing. So, and as you see, this test actually cares about the owner, but it has to include a valid value of the domain. So the test smell that we identified was an overlap of the scope of the test. These were all unit tests, so they were overlapping in their scope. So we said, yeah, well, that's not a problem really, because we can we have a maintainability issue, but we can address it by moving all the creation of the requests to a separate method. And we could say in each test, just create a valid request, and if you want to have anything that's invalid, we can just override it, and everything is good, right? The maintainability issue is addressed. But still, we would have a situation where in case of one of the validation being broken, for example, someone wrote code that broke one of the validations, the tests for the other validations would fail as well from the same reason. So this was another test smell that was still in there, because tests were failing for reasons other than what they were testing. And I think I don't have to introduce this book. I think all of you at least heard of it, Growing Object-Oriented Software Guided by Tests. And the book basically says that when you have test smells, it's useful to check the design, because maybe the design is wrong. Maybe the design is forcing the tests to be smelly. And we looked at the design, and it occurred to us that actually this advice is true. This advice is valid, because the validation object, the validation class, included a decision on which validations to apply to which properties. But on the other hand, it contained the implementations of each of these validations. So it was clearly doing too much, and it was the cohesion was low. As I said, this is a simplified case. In the real scenario, it was more apparent. So anyway, due to this fact, we could not, in a test, for example, for owner, we could not validate the owner, or we could not trigger the validation that we cared about in this test without triggering all the other validations. So actually, each test would need to have some values that would bypass these two. And this is what really happened in the tests. And this was true for the target and for the duration as well. So our first attempt was to just take this class and just split it in half. So then we would have the decision on what validations to apply to which property in this place, and the validations would be in this place. So we might say the cohesion is better, but that's really not looking good. The division between this class and this class, it looks kind of artificial, right? Because actually what use is of this class if not to be used with this one, right? But as we looked at this one, we arrived at the conclusion that actually the owner and target validation are pretty much format validations. And the duration validation is a validation of a minimum number. So using that information, we refactored this class into what basically was a set of assertions, which made it a little bit more generic and a little bit more general purpose. Seeing a pattern that we know, we thought that we are going in the right direction. But there was another issue, and the issue was here. Actually, the subscription request is data without behavior. It has some getters and setters, but actually it behaves like a piece of data without actual behavior. On the other hand, this thing is behavior without data, and it actually what it does is just to handle this data, so it's pretty much tied to it. And if you think about it, this is actually a structural procedural design, right? We have functions and data separated. So we didn't like that. We wanted to have something more object-oriented. So we combined the data and the behavior into a new abstraction that was called subscription start. And among the other methods that are not listed here, it had the validate method that just would take all the properties from this data structure that was now wrapped inside. It was encapsulated, and pass it to the right assertion. So the final solution was a piece of design that was designed in a more cohesive and object-oriented fashion. So let's see now what the testing feels like now. Let's see if the smells are addressed. So if we would have to test the subscription start class, we could just invoke the validate method and mock the assertions out, and just verify that all the assertions were used with the right properties, right? So this could be even achieved with a single test. On the other hand, the assertions were put each into a separate public method, so there was no overlap. We could trigger each one on its own without actually caring for another. So for example, the format tests would just test this one and do not touch this. And the range validation, range assertion tests would just touch this one and then not care about this at all. And so the lesson learned for us was to listen to the test smells, as they can point that there is a problem. On the other hand, the test smells do not solve the problem. So we had to apply our design knowledge, apply our design principles and techniques to address the issue and to identify what the actual issue is in the first place. And as we did both of those things, we arrived at some better abstractions. So that's all for this talk. Thank you very much.